This is Lewis Hart for the Ring Magazine, and it's my pleasure to be joined with Dan Rafael for the first time in quite a while. Dan, it's been a long time since we last caught up. But yeah, it's good to hear from you. How's things?
Things are good. It's good to be back with you. Different outlet, but same voice, same pretty looks, right?
Yeah, absolutely, of course. And yeah, no better place to start than Saturday night. A great card in Riyadh. Obviously, it was billed one of the cards of the century, and yeah, some great fights and some really interesting ones throughout the whole fight night. But yeah, I guess sort of first things first. What are your main takeaway from the whole night of fights?
A long day of fights, but really an outstanding show, top to bottom. I mean, you really can't complain, and especially as a person that has been involved with boxing or as a reporter for a long time, and certainly spent a lot of money in buying and watching pay-per-views. The price was right, let me tell you. I mean, I don't know what they charge for it in other places in the world, but in the United States, the pay-per-view was $25.99, $26. I mean, that's just less. That's as cheap a price as there was when pay-per-view basically started in like the 1990s. Maybe they were 19.99 or 14.99 back in the day. But for that quality and quantity for $26, and all the fights basically were even up. I mean, Shakur's fight was the one that on paper was sort of the wide one, but all the other six fights that were the main, title fights and interim title fights, every one of them was a fight that was, fairly even on paper, that, 50-50 kind of fights where, normal people that understood what the matches were could certainly see either side winning. No humongous favorites in either any of those bouts. So I thought it was a terrific card. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was watching boxing, Lewis, at like 10:30 in the morning till 8 hours later, or whatever it was. I mean, it's kind of long, but it was worth it. I mean, all the fights pretty much for one way or another lived up to it.
Yeah, I completely agree. As you say, being in the arena, it was definitely a long one for myself. Yeah, I guess first things first, we'll start from the top of the card and work our way down. But Dmitry Bivol event gets his revenge on Artur Beterbiev in the rematch. First things first, what was your thoughts on what was another a great fight? It seemed like they picked up from round 13 in there in the ring.
Yeah, pretty much. I thought it was a terrific fight. I thought it was a better fight than the first one, just in terms of the entertainment value of it, even though it was still similarly competitive and very close, obviously. Here's the thing: they've now fought 24 rounds. You can make a very legit argument that they've basically won 12 apiece. And tell you the truth, I scored both fights even. I had both of the fights 114 to 114. They were different kinds of fights. In the first fight, Beterbiev closed stronger. In this rematch, Bivol really did much better work down the stretch, although Beterbiev did win, or Bivol did the work down the stretch, but it was Beterbiev that did win the 12th round. But it was a really high level fight. I mean, these are two supreme technicians. They're also tremendous fighters, just with the heart they show and their ability to take a punch. Obviously, Bivol is not as big of a puncher as Beterbiev is, but I thought it was a really high level fight. I got the feeling, though, with the way that Beterbiev did slow down a little bit in the last few rounds, that maybe there's something to be said that the legs at age 40 aren't what they once were, but still a supreme fighter, both these guys. I made the point to somebody that asked me about it the other day, right after the show, that both of these fighters, Beterbiev and Bivol, and there's a lot of great light heavyweights through the years in boxing, but I believe very strongly that both these fighters, you could drop them in any era against any top level light heavyweight in the history of boxing. And I'm not saying they're going to beat all those guys or anything like that, but they would compete with everybody, no doubt about it.
You mentioned there about you having the fight 114, 114. It was sort of the question I was going to ask. Vadim, Bivol, and Hearn, they both sort of had an issue with one of the judges' scorecards being 114, 114. But yeah, from your point of view, no complaints there. You said you had it similar.
I expect nothing less from Eddie and Vadim. I mean, I have no quarrel with either of those men, and they do a great job at what they do. And obviously, they're emotional, they have a vested interest, and they're looking out for their guy. But if you take a step back and you watch the fight, 114, 114 is not is a perfectly legitimate scorecard. I always talk about the range of acceptable scores on fights. You know, there's a reason why they have three judges. Why we're all watching, we're not all going to have the same opinion on how we see things, or the sort of the style in which we may judge a fight. But I feel like that fight, at worst, I guess Bivol as a in a draw, and at best you could do it maybe 116 to 112 in favor of Bivol. So that to me, that is the range of acceptable scores, and that's what the judges actually came up with. I mean, we don't always agree with the judges, but to me, it felt like, what, they did a good job judging that fight. All three judges, even if you slightly disagree. At the end of the day, 114, 114, I feel like is a perfectly fine scorecard. Same scorecard I had for the first fight and the second fight. The interesting thing is you have two majority decisions with all 6 scores that were rendered in the 2 fights were the same in both fights. Just the 2 that were not the draw scorecard went for the other fighter in either of the fights. So, they're as evenly matched as you could ask for.
Was you surprised by Bivol's improvements in the fight?
Maybe a little bit, but I knew how great of a technician he is. To me, the question was, is he going to be able to avoid big punches from Artur Beterbiev for 12 rounds? He never really got caught with a great right hand until literally the 12th round. And even when he did finally get caught, he took it like a champ. I mean, they were both throwing shots at the same time, and Beterbiev landed very, very hard, and he stood up to it. So I can't say it surprised me. I mean, you give Dmitry Bivol 12 rounds against a guy, and then you give him the opportunity to go through a training camp and preparing for the same guy again that he already had a lot of success against. It doesn't surprise me that somebody with that type of intelligence would not be able to make, the slightest adjustments or recognize certain things that he sees in the ring, that he'd be able to maybe do something slightly different. But he just, look, he spent the whole build up to the fight. And I had interviewed him before the fight. I saw some comments that he made to other people as well. I have to do more punches, more activity, more intelligence, more accuracy with my punches. He did all that. I mean, if you look at the CompuBox, and I'm not saying that CompuBox is the end all be all, but if you compare what the numbers that they came up with in the first fight to the numbers that they came up with in the second fight, he did throw more punches, and he did land quite a few more punches. So he accomplished his goal, and he actually landed at a better accuracy rate. So the 3 boxes that he wanted to check to make sure he got the victory this time around, he was able to do that. Now, part of that is because of what he was able to do, and part of that maybe just because Beterbiev was, not quite as good as he was in the first fight, although still pretty damn good. Look, it was they're super evenly matched. It was a terrific fight, and it was a real joy to watch them do their business.
Now Dmitry has quite a few options. He's spoken about moving to cruiserweight. He also sort of flirted with the idea of going down to 168. For yourself, what would you like to see? Do you think the trilogy would make the most sense now for his career?
I mean, I don't know about his career. I think a lot of fans wouldn't mind seeing it, but I also understand the perspective of those who say, look, we've seen 24 rounds. They were terrific fights. We got 2 close calls, but after 2 in a row, let's see them do something a little different. Let's get a fresh fight. So I'm not opposed to a trilogy if that's what the boxers and with the promoters and with Turkey, what they all decide is the best course of action. Far be it for me to argue putting the 2 best light heavyweights in the world in a trilogy fight off of 2 really good fights. So I can't really complain about that. But if I was able to wave the magic wand, I frankly would like to see them do something a little different. I would like to see Bivol either, do what his choices were. Either go to cruiserweight if that's something that floats his boat, great. Otherwise, there's plenty of great options that he could fight in the light heavyweight division. I don't see him going to super middleweight. That doesn't make a lot of sense when you're the champ at this weight class. Why strain yourself to do that for no particular reason? It's not like he's going to get a Canelo rematch right away. He's the one that beat Canelo. So the one fight that Canelo has said that he would go back to light heavyweight for was a rematch with Bivol. So if Canelo wanted to do that, post the William Skull fight, and obviously he's got the supposedly the Crawford fight after that, and I'm not sure how he fits that in. So I don't see that as being, at least not this year anyway, as part of that game plan. So for me, it's Bivol either go to cruiserweight or pick out one of the other top light heavyweights. David Benavidez was there ringside. That's a great matchup. That'd be an exciting fight. Frankly, if he didn't want to do the fight against Benavidez, I would not be opposed to seeing David Benavidez fight Beterbiev. I mean, he does have for what it's worth, the regular title of the WBA, the interim title of the WBC. It would be a really exciting fight. Or you know what? Look, he could go after Callum Smith, who put on a great performance on the undercard and won an interim title to become one of his mandatories. I mean, there's other light heavyweights around. I don't think Bivol is going to struggle to find a good fight, put it like that. But if they do the trilogy fight, fine.
Yeah, that was something I was going to touch on later in terms of Benavidez, Smith, etc. Touch on the chief support. Yeah, an interesting one. I mean, it was a crazy sort of deal on Thursday, Friday, and then on to Saturday as well. Joseph Parker obviously ends up fighting Martin Bakole. Firstly, just touching on that fight, what did you really make of however long it lasted?
Well, number one, you got to give both guys the credit for doing it. I mean, there was really, that's a very unusual thing to have a guy come in on that short of notice, particularly when you got to travel all that way. I mean, I've seen guys maybe be on site, as a backup or maybe on the undercard and things are arranged on very short notice. But to have Martin fly from Congo, where he was basically, getting his visa and hanging out with his family, and then suddenly he's on a plane 2 stops to get to Riyadh, doesn't get to the fight site until the early morning hours of the day of the fight. That is highly unusual, but he got paid a lot of money to do it. So good for him. He secured, a lot of financial security for him and his family. So that's a good thing. And Parker, I mean, that's a calculated risk, I guess, that you don't know what kind of shape Martin is in, but to take on that type of guy on short notice, when you've been preparing for Daniel Dubois, who is obviously a much different kind of heavyweight than Bakole. But being honest, while I didn't expect Joe Parker to stop him in the second round, I definitely felt like, no question in my mind, that Parker would win that fight. That was my pick all along. As soon as I heard that they made the decision to swap the opponent when Daniel dropped out, because I just felt like there's no real way that Martin Bakole, even with a fight coming up in May, was in any kind of serious training camp this soon ahead of that, knowing he's in Congo, meaning knowing how quickly he was going to go to Riyadh, literally to go into a fight with a world-class heavyweight, experienced heavyweight, a good resume heavyweight like Joe Parker, a former world champion, a current interim title holder. He wasn't even going to have one sparring session for the fight. That's a rough way to go. So that wasn't happening. Then when I saw what he weighed in at, and he was 27 pounds or so heavier than when he had his best performance in August against Jared Anderson in a crushing knockout victory, I'm like, okay, put on 27 pounds. Now, if he had been in a full training camp, he probably would have taken some of that off and been in much better condition. But with basically no time to train at all, I just didn't feel like that he's going to be able to compete with Joseph Parker, and that proved out to be right. Now, I didn't think he would get knocked out in the second round, but I'll say this, Lewis, the way that the knockout punch happened, landing basically high tempo, top of the head type of shot, even if he had a long training camp and was in great shape, that's the kind of punch that still might have done the same thing.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And one thing, I'll ask you, obviously Bakole got paid a lot of money and he saved the show and, all the things sort of taken into account. When you do shoot it down, for yourself, do you think the fight should have happened when you consider like Bakole? I think he came in at like 3 o'clock on fight day, 3 o'clock in the morning. Billy Nelson told me yesterday he was sleeping in the changing room. Like, do you think there should have been something to sort of the board or whatever should have done something to not allow it?
I mean, I assume that he passed his medicals. I mean, so that's the main thing, that in terms of his physical health, he was, okay to be in the boxing match. He is a professional. He's an experienced contender level heavyweight. So I'm kind of mixed about that question. Number one, I don't think he quote unquote saved the show. There were 6 other outstanding fights on the card, 5 outstanding fights and one maybe slightly lesser fight. So having Joe Parker drop off, if that was what was necessary, wasn't going to ruin the card, in my opinion. It wasn't the main event or anything like that. I am glad that Joseph Parker didn't have to put in a hard camp and have it go to waste just because his opponent was not able to fight. So on that sense, it's a good thing. The regulators, they're supposed to do their job, and Martin is a top heavyweight. And it was just one of those things where I guess it could go either way. I didn't have a huge problem with it, but I also don't think anybody should be hugely surprised by what happened, I guess, is the point.
When it comes to Joseph Parker, he was pretty clear about who he wanted next. He spoke about Alexander Usyk, Daniel Dubois is obviously still there. How do you think he shapes up against the 2 champions at heavyweight?
I think he can give both guys a good fight. I don't know any doubt about it. I mean, obviously, I would give him a better chance in terms of actually winning the fight against Dubois, because I feel like they're more evenly matched, and Usyk is such a monster technician. That's a hard fight for any heavyweight. But look, I hope Joseph Parker gets one of those opportunities. I think he would, do a good job in those fights. He's a guy that's certainly earned the position. I mean, there are a few heavyweights that you can think of in recent years that have that type of streak combined with 3 outstanding victories in a row. I mean, he's won now 6 fights in a row. Obviously, they're not all against super top guys, but now his fights back to back to back are Bakole, granted, with some unusual circumstances, a victory against Zhilei Zhang and a victory against Deontay Wilder. I mean, those are big time wins. That's a heck of a run. If that can't earn you a title shot in today's boxing landscape, I'm not sure what can.
Another fighter that dealt with opponent issues throughout the week was Shakur Stevenson. Ended up fighting Josh Padley, who was coming off obviously a good win against Mark Chamberlain, but as I say, took the fight on 4 days' notice. I guess what did you make of the performance from Shakur and everything that sort of came with it?
Well, the funny thing about it was when Floyd Schofield fell out and they secured Padley to take his place, I looked at the WBC rankings, and Josh Padley was actually 1 spot ahead of Floyd Schofield in those rankings. One guy was 12th, one guy was 13th. Now, I don't necessarily view either one of them as the 12th or 13th best light heavyweight in the world, but it just makes the point, though, that it was certainly approvable, if you will, based on the WBC standards for Shakur's title. But I thought Shakur fought a good fight. I mean, he's never going to be a guy that's going to fight blazing fights everybody's going to be talking about the next day about how exciting it was. That's okay. Shakur just does what he does, and that's pick you apart, break you down, and with an opponent that was clearly not at his level, even if he was at his best. But now you're taking on a guy like Padley, not on his level, who's only had the fight on 4 days' notice. It didn't surprise me that Shakur dominated, and he did get him out of there. He did stop him. I've watched Shakur's entire career. I've never known him to be like this devastating body puncher, but he went to that body a lot, and obviously he scored the 3 knockdowns with the body punches in round number 9 and got him out of there. Padley gave the effort, an honest fighter, probably won the first round on the scorecards, which maybe be an upset right there on its own. That was not necessarily because he did anything so stupendous, but really that was, Shakur sort of seeing what he's got in front of him and taking his time as he does, sort of taking in the information. Look, Shakur did what he's supposed to do. He did not go a boring 12 rounds and make everybody think he stunk it out. He went 9 rounds or 8+ rounds and, did his thing, boxed nicely, landed a lot of punches, sort of looked like in the middle of the fight he was dealing with a hand injury to his left hand. But at the end of the day, he got a knockout, and that's what people want to see. And so he sets himself up for some big business. I hope that they can get a more significant fight for him, either compared to either Padley or Schofield. And look, Padley, I mean, okay, he lost the fight to Shakur. I don't think his career is over. He'll get more notoriety for lasting 9 rounds and giving a good effort against Shakur than he's done probably even for the win against Chamberlain. So I don't think his career is in a bad situation, and he made great money, life-altering money to take the assignment on short notice. So good for him.
Is there a concern with Shakur? Because even before Saturday night, he was pretty open about his hand injuries. He said in an interview with Adel Depot that he can only afford to fight twice a year now because to allow his hand to recover. And I think, Shakur being sort of on that 26, 27, still fresh, still young, is there a cause for concern where he's been pretty open about his hand injuries and for future fights for him?
Absolutely. I mean, that's, if you're a professional boxer, your hands are your lifeblood. That's how you do your business. That's how you do your work. You got to take care of them. And we've seen fighters with hands that are brittle that have had problems. I remember talking to George Foreman once years ago, and he said, I don't care what any fighter says. Every single boxer that's ever laced on gloves has hand problems, including Big George, who was one of the great punchers of all time. I mean, Shakur has a style that is reminiscent of Floyd Mayweather. Floyd always had hand problems throughout his career. So it doesn't surprise me. As long as Shakur takes care of them, 2 fights a year was probably all we were going to get from him anyway. So the main thing is when you get those 2 fights, make them count. We don't want to see him against guys we never heard of. Now, obviously, what happened on Saturday was, unfortunate. Those were unforeseen circumstances. But now, look, he is 27. He's in his prime or close to it anyway. He's a 3-division world champion. He's a super talented fighter, got the background as an amateur, has fought a lot of good opposition as a professional. And so now it's about going after the biggest and the best fights. And, hopefully they can make those matchups, whoever they're against. Obviously, he talked about after the fight, he wants Tank Davis. Tank Davis is on the same schedule as Shakur. Tank fights in a few days. And that would be a huge fight, obviously. I mean, I was saying to somebody that if you ask me, Shakur against Tank is, in no doubt in my mind, is the biggest, most high-profile fight you can make right now between American champions.
I was going to ask you, that was my next question. Do you think realistically that fight can happen? Because Shakur's obviously aligned to Matchroom. I don't know how long that deal is. I think he might have 1 fight left on that deal. I'm not too sure. Tank's been pretty open about not really wanting to play ball at this current point with Riyadh season and Turkey Al Sheikh. So realistically, I know that Shakur's going to bang on that drum. Ham's going to bang on that drum of wanting Tank fight. Do you think that this fight could happen maybe even in 2025?
I think with the amount of money that's available via the Saudis, any fight can happen. Remember, it wasn't that long ago where Canelo Alvarez was saying, no, thank you. I'm not interested in doing anything with the Saudis. And he was doing his own thing. And guess what? Now he's got apparently a 4-fight deal with Turkey, and he's fighting on one of their cards coming up in May, a planned fight in September against Terrence Crawford, and then 2 more fights in 2026. So, in boxing, it's typically about the money. And if the money is there, I'm pretty sure you can get Shakur Stevenson and Gervonta Tank Davis in the ring with each other. PBC may not have done a huge amount of business with Turkey, but they've done some. I mean, Carlos Adames was on this card. He's a PBC fighter going to Saudi Arabia. They had a few of their fighters that boxed on the Riyadh season card in Los Angeles that took place in August. So, everybody needs to work, and if the money is there, any fight can get made.
You mentioned Carlos Adames there. That was the next fight I was going to touch on. Many of the feeling in the UK was that this Adames was sort of a built-in, ready for Sheeraz to take the world title off him. I don't think a lot of people from the UK sort of rated Adames, but he did. He boxed a really good fight on Saturday night. A lot of people thought he did win the fight. Yeah, I guess what was your main takeaway from that fight between Carlos Adames and Hamzah Sheeraz?
I've seen Carlos Adames fight many, many times. I mean, he is a guy that has always been a talented fighter, but never has struck me anyway as like an elite guy necessarily. Yeah, I know he has a world title and good for him. I'm happy to see, guys be able to make the money and set themselves up. But he was not in particularly good fights. He didn't fight. He fought some good opponents. He has a win against like Sergey Devenchenko, and he beat up on in the last fight he took against Terrell Gausha. He was an experienced Olympian and had been in previous world title fights. But he was at a certain level. And so I thought Sheeraz, with his size, with his length, with the kind of power that he's displayed, with his good activity level. Remember, he had three fights in 2024, all against pretty good opposition, knocked all of them out. Meanwhile, you got Adames, who only had 3 fights in the last 3 years. Now, part of that's not his fault because they kept putting off the Charlo fight when he was the interim champion. Finally, when Charlo was stripped, they elevated him to the full title holder. But the point is, he hadn't been active. So I thought Sheeraz was going to take him apart just on the skill and the strength and the activity level. But Adames, he surprised me. I thought that was probably the best fight he ever fought. I thought he did a great job of. It took him a few rounds to get used to that sort of big body in front of him, the height and the reach that the man had. But eventually, he was able to settle in, find a way to get inside, whip those shots around the side, up to the head and the body. And when it was over, I thought he won 8 rounds to 4. So Sheeraz, in my mind, was very lucky and fortunate to get out of there with a draw. But in the long run, from Adames, a draw or a win is all good because you still keep the title. So he sets himself up for some more business. And Sheeraz was a huge disappointment. I don't know if I thought they said on the broadcast that he had some kind of hand injury, so maybe that was part of it. But in the end, when Sheeraz was throwing that nice long jab and connecting, he just never followed up on it. And you can't just sit there and as they say, admire your work if you're trying to win a world title against a very competent opponent. So he just didn't do enough. I think when he goes back and watches the video, he's going to be really disappointed in himself because he definitely has the talent and the ability to do it. He just was not able to put it together against Adames. Part of that was his own fault, and I'm sure part of that you can attribute to Adames maybe being better than a lot of us thought he was.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a fair point that you make there, Dan, especially on Carlos Adames. My favourite fight on the card, and I think everyone's favourite fight, Callum Smith against Joshua Buatsi. Smith almost sort of not rolling back the years, but showing people that, look, he's still well and alive in this 175-pound division. Yeah, one of the best fights I've seen so far in this year. Yeah, what was your main takeaway from a great domestic scrap between two great fighters?
Yeah, I thought that was a hell of a fight. I mean, it was here where I was watching it in the United States, and the first fight of the main fights anyway of the title bouts. It was early in the morning. It was still in the morning. It was still like I don't know, like 11:30 in the morning or something like that. Hell of a fight. Way to kick off a show. Everybody talked about how deep this card was, how great this card was, and that if that was not part of this kind of show, Callum Smith against Josh Buatsi, that had been the main event. In the UK, fighting on a Sky Sports show or something like that. It would have been, in a nice arena, wherever they decided to put it in, London or in Manchester, or wherever. They would have drawn a great crowd for a fight like that, But here, because of the depth and how great this show was, it was the first one. But Callum Smith has always been a guy that's been kind of underrated, maybe undervalued by some people. You make the point that a lot of people thought he might be done. He said it himself after the fight that he thought that was kind of disrespectful. Callum Smith has 2 losses in a good career. He lost a decision to Canelo Alvarez in a super middleweight title fight when Canelo was coming into the division. It was just went on a rampage through super middleweight division. And his only other loss was a couple fights before where he went as the mandatory to the Quebec City to fight Artur Beterbiev, and he got taken apart by the number 1 light heavyweight in the world at that time, and the unified and the lineal champion. He just took him out in 7 rounds. But you lost to 2 Hall of Fame fighters. Everybody else he beat. And Buatsi, good fighter, obviously, Olympian and has some credentials, but not on the level of a Beterbiev or of a Canelo Alvarez. So, he did turn back the clock a little bit. He showed toughness. He showed grit, as did Buatsi, but a little bit more from Callum. Worked through the cut, stayed busy, knocked out the mouthpiece a couple of times, battered Buatsi to the body. I thought he was going to stop him in the 6th round, something like that. But hell of a fight. I mean, a credit to, I mean, both credit to both guys for having that kind of grit that they showed. But you got to love the Callum Smith sort of reborn a little bit later part of his career. He's such a nice guy, also very hard to root against Callum Smith or any of the Smith brothers when they were fighting. So hell of a fight, really good way to kick things off.
Let's say Dmitry and Artur, they're tied into this trilogy. Let's see that happens. Do you think it makes sense next for a potential David Benavidez fight? I spoke to Callum before the Buatsi fight, and he was really open to the fight of David Benavidez. Obviously, they were both champions at the same time at 168. Do you think it makes sense for that fight? That you've got the number one and two in a trilogy, and then that's essentially that could those two are the next contender in line for the title.
I think that's a perfect kind of fight. If in fact there's going to be a third fight between Beterbiev and Bivol, and you're looking for the best and the most important and the most, fight that would be entertaining for fans, absolutely, Callum Smith against Benavidez would be in that category, no question about it. I have no doubt in my mind that either guy would take that fight. Again, you look at the track record of Callum Smith's career as well as the track record of David Benavidez. These are not guys that turn fights down. Obviously, they got to get the business situated and make sure that's good with the money and all that. But I think from a competitive point of view, a good fight. I mean, I would probably lean towards Benavidez, but look, a lot of people lean towards Buatsi, and look what happened. The veteran, the more veteran fighter in Callum Smith got the job done. That's a really good matchup. You can make, and there's other fights for him also. I mean, a Buatsi rematch wouldn't be out of the realm. Maybe you get Anthony Ard involved with that. I mean, there's other guys that would make for a good fight, certainly for the British public, with Callum Smith.
Yeah. Last couple from myself. Someone that really, really impressed me on Saturday night was Vergil Ortiz. I thought he boxed tremendously against Islam Madrimov. As I say, tough 12 rounds for him, but what did you make of Ortiz's performance?
He fought a good fight, no doubt. I mean, I thought it was going to be a little bit more of an explosion early on, but Madrimov was moving and, laterally and in and out. He was bouncing up and down like a jackrabbit, back and forth. But eventually he got tired, or, tired to the point where he couldn't keep that level of the movement. And Vergil did a great job, like a much more seasoned fighter. He stayed poised. He stayed calm. He didn't let it frustrate him. He took some good shots too. And, by the end, I think it was like the second round, Vergil already had marks on both of his eyes, above his eye, below his eye. He was getting tagged, but he stayed poised and he kept on trucking. And eventually he started landing heavy punches. He's a good puncher. I'm not sure that power is translated as well to 154 as it was when he was fighting at 47 and 40, but he's still a very dangerous guy. And I thought he did a great job. He fought a really good fight, and there's no doubt he won the fight. That's a big win for him. I mean, when you take a look at what Madrimov had done in his previous fight, yeah, he lost to Crawford. But that was a really close, very competitive fight. Some people thought that Madrimov had done enough even to win the fight. So to watch Vergil beat him much more easily than the great Terence Crawford, that has to say something about where Vergil Ortiz is in his career. I think he's competitive with anybody at 154, contender, champion. Even Crawford he would compete with, in my opinion. Now, again, I'm not saying he beats everybody, but he's in all those fights. He's a really top-level fighter, and that was a big win for him.
Completely agreed. As I said, I was impressed with Ortiz. Agit Kabayel with another really impressive win, climbed off of canvas to stop Zhilei Zhang. As I say, another real good win for Kabayel, who's proven to be, a lot of people are talking about sort of heavyweight contenders, and Kabayel definitely has to be right up there in that conversation. Yeah,
no question. I picked Kabayel to win the fight. I wasn't surprised I wasn't surprised he stopped him. I wasn't surprised he won the fight. Zhang, I think he's had his big moments. He's 41 years old. He's never been in the greatest condition. The other big wins he's had have been against older guys, also like Wilder, like Joe Joyce. And I don't know if he was able to get that back. He's so dangerous with the left hand, but he doesn't throw nearly enough punches. Does not have the stamina to fight a full 3 minutes of a round. If you can tire him out after literally 30 seconds or a minute, you can pretty much clean up on him. And the knockdown that he had against Kabayel, I felt like it was not one of Zhilei Zhang's biggest shots. It was definitely a good knockdown, but it wasn't a knockdown that had Kabayel, in my opinion, any kind of serious damage or really hurt. It was, I would say it's maybe a little more than a flash knockdown, but it wasn't a devastating knockdown. He got up very quickly and went right back to work, and he won, pretty much the entire, he lost the first round on the scorecards. He won every other round of the fight other than that 15, 20 seconds that were, encompassing around the knockdown. And then he just never stopped throwing body punches. Zhilei Zhang could not take the body shots, got a lot of headshots. I mean, for a big guy like Kabayel, who's like, what, 6'3",
Hmm.
240 something. He's got pretty fast hands, and he
Yeah.
throws them. He's not afraid to throw them. And he's the epitome of a guy that has made a living on Riyadh season cards. I mean, this is now his third upset knockout win in a row fighting on these shows. I mean, and they've been different level of wins. I mean, Makhmudov, he got the knockout win against him, and Makhmudov showed in his fights after that maybe he wasn't what a lot of people thought. Okay. Then he knocked out Frank Sanchez, who was a very skilled technician and a very good fighter and still probably could be a top contender down the road. And after that, then he knocks out Zhilei Zhang. That's a big, huge win also. So Kabayel now is in a great position. He gets the WBC's interim title, and you match him up with anybody. I mean, would you say, like, I'm not saying this fight's going to happen. Joseph Parker against Kabayel. I mean, I can see that fight being won by either of those guys. I mean, Kabayel doesn't have the level of experience or resume yet that a Parker does, but I think anybody watching that show would look at that and say, that's a pretty damn good fight.
Yeah, I completely agree. And as I say, like when I look at Kabayel, I think what makes him different as well, like you don't really get many heavyweights, especially in this era, that are good body punchers like he is. As I say, he sort of broke down the body in the Makhmudov fight and the Sanchez fight and very well in the Zhang fight. As I say, I was going to ask you, when it comes to the top level contenders, Parker, Bakole, Dubois, even Usyk, like you must think that he definitely can be really competitive with these guys.
Yeah, Kabayel, based on his 3 wins that he's had, plus he's still undefeated and all that, and you can just tell when you watch him the way he throws his punches. He's snappy with his shots. He's got a pretty good, as you mentioned, an excellent body attack. Comes in pretty good condition, good size, not undersized. I mean, he may not be as big as a Zhilei Zhang, but I don't always think that the size is necessarily that big of a positive for you if you're in the kind of shape that Zhang was in. So Kabayel, to me, 100% has put himself in a position where he is a bona fide top 10 heavyweight contender. I'm not sure. I haven't thought about where I would put him, but certainly he's among the top group of guys. And I feel like he has earned a position to get a bigger fight. This was a big win for him. And, I want to watch him again. That's the other thing about him. He's not a heavyweight that goes out there and bores you to death. I mean, he was very exciting in these 3 fights he's won on these Riyadh season cards.
Completely agree. Dan, before I do let you go, I'm obviously always got to give a shout out to the Substack. I'm still going live and strong. Yeah, as you say, where can people find it?
Yeah, still going strong, baby. danrafael.substack.com. Take however long it takes you to type in your email address, and you pop that in and just check your emails, check your phone alerts, and you'll be getting all my material. It's a beautiful thing.
Of course it is, and as always, links will be in the description. Dan, always a pleasure. Really good to be catching up with you again. Yeah, appreciate the time, man. Thank you. Cheers.
My pleasure, Lewis, and congratulations on your gig with The Ring.
Cheers, mate. Thank you. Top man.